الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الله أكبر لله الحمد. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. So welcome back to the Tafseer class. As we usually start, inshallah ta'ala, if you're here for the first time, welcome. You're more than welcome to attend, whether you're a credit or audit or just an observant to the class. At the end of the day, we're all learning the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for us to understand it and implement it in our lives. And so there's benefit of inshallah attending bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And if you are a credit or audit student, I'm hoping you're getting the messages inshallah online. Last week there was no class, so I hope nobody showed up here and expected a class. We had announced it before, we sent a message, but inshallah ta'ala going forward, I don't anticipate any more cancellations for the term. Make dua that this is the case for the rest of the term inshallah. Okay, do we have a clicker here? No. Perfect, jazakallah khair. This one I won't trouble you inshallah. Let's just make sure it works. Yes, it works. Barakallah. Okay. Can somebody remind us what we covered so far in terms of the last cluster of Juz' Amma that we started this term? I usually ask questions and the answer's already on the board. So this is the cheating part. So we talked about the first three clusters. I'll summarize them really quickly, inshallah ta'ala. The first cluster, which wasn't covered in this class, it was covered in the previous term, is from Surah An-Naba to Surah Abbas. And this covers the three essential components of faith. Right? And by the way, just again, if you're joining us for the first time, Juz' Amma is the summary of the Quran. We cover Juz' Amma so that we understand the basically main concepts that Islam came with in the Quran, that were revealed in the Quran. It's all summarized in Juz' Amma, those main concepts in small doses, small pills. Okay? Each surah in the Quran comes with a main point, main concept, main message. Just like Surah Al-Baqarah has one main message, so does Surah An-Nas. Okay? Each surah comes with one main message. However, Surah Al-Baqarah being long, and obviously the surah that precede this juz' are longer because they have more elaboration, examples, analogies, stories, and so on and so forth. Juz' Amma is to the point, it's concise, and so if you understand Juz' Amma, you've got the gist of what the Quran is talking about, the main principles. What we also talked about is that Juz' Amma doesn't talk about ahkam. It doesn't talk about ahkam, doesn't talk about rulings, right? Fiqh doesn't talk about that. And if you actually look at the Quran as a whole, most of the Quran, about 70% or so, is not ahkam. It's based on belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His oneness, accountability, Day of Judgment, prophets, examples of people before us, so on and so forth. And so you will find that Juz' Amma itself, because it being the summary of the Quran, doesn't have ahkam. Because most of the Quran, most of it, the lion's share of it, doesn't include ahkam, and most surahs, actually surahs that were revealed in Mecca, are not surah that have, they don't contain ahkam or rulings. Those are for Medina, because in Mecca, as we described earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to establish the fundamentals, the clear concept of tawheed, and belief, and accountability, and those sort of things. And in Medina came the ayat that talk about building a society. Right? Building a society, building a nation that requires how do you deal with each other? How do you deal with people within the community and society and people outside of that society, like other faiths or disbelievers, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a high-level overview of Juz' Amma. And what we're trying to, inshallah, attain is understanding that, because it's critical for our faith. And also, most of us probably recite from the juz' in most of our salawat. And so for us to be able to attain a state of khushu', a state of focus and concentration, we need to understand the juz', right? Especially where we're reading surah, we need to understand them inside out, what they mean. What are we reading here? And contemplate them, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So the first cluster is talking about the three essential components of faith. I won't go into the details because that's for another class if you're going to join part one in the future, inshallah ta'ala. And so is the second cluster. It talked about the concept of choice. No other religion, no other philosophy, no other book or science talks about the concept of choice as clearly as the Quran and as clearly as Islam. Okay? And so that starts from or Surah Al-Takwir to Surah Al-Buruj. And we kind of covered most of the third cluster of Juz' Amma, which runs from Surah Al-Tariq to Surah Al-Layl in the first part of the Tafseer class, but we continued and completed it, I think, the first week or two of this term. And that talked about basically ideas, religious concepts that you can't come to on your own. You can't think of on your own. It's religious, it's divine concepts taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to overcome the barriers and challenges of life in order for you to be able to make it in your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that path that we're all pursuing is obviously described in the very first surah of Juz' Amma, because that's what sets the goals and objectives of why you and I are here. Okay? And then the fourth cluster, which we got to a few weeks ago, which is called the group of surah, which runs from Surah Al-Duha on to the last surah, which is Surah Al-Nas, talks about the Islamic values, al-qiyam, principles and values of Islam. And these surah are often grouped and entitled in a group, basically al-Qisar al-Mufassal, the short summarized surah of the Quran. Starts with Surah Al-Duha, which we talked about. Al-Duha means the morning light or the brightest hours of the day. And in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses or talks about dealing with life's difficulties, right? And it's a very fitting name for that concept. And then the next surah, which is Surah Al-Sharh, talks about, which means the relief, talks about not worrying, particularly not worrying about potential challenges that can come into your future. And we emphasize the concept of inna ma'al usri yusra. With difficulty comes many eases. And then I think we covered last time, so 2 weeks ago, Surah Al-Teen, which talks about the concept that human beings have a greater, higher purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them to fulfill. If you fulfill that purpose, you will live a happy and satisfying life. Those who don't get a miserable life. So that's where we covered so far. And inshallah ta'ala today is actually one of my favorite surah, is Surah Al-Alaq, which means the blood clot. We're going to talk about this surah, and it covers the concept of Iqra. Now I'm going to take the next probably 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes talking about the concept of Iqra. Because it's one of those concepts that is widely misunderstood. Okay? If I was to ask the question, what does Iqra mean? Most people will give me the same answer. What will people say? Read. Unfortunately, that's not what it means. That's not what it means. And so we'll talk about the surah, kind of give a preamble before we start reading it, inshallah ta'ala. Surah Al-Alaq is called Surah Al-Alaq, but in also some books, Tafseer, it's also referred to as Surah Iqra Bismi Rabbik. That's another name for it. As well as Surah Iqra Bismi Rabbika Alladhi Khalaq. So the first ayah, essentially. It's also, some books refer to it as Surah Iqra as well. Okay? This surah, does anybody know when it was revealed? Is it Meccan or Medin? So really, when was it revealed? What year was it revealed? At least give me the month. Ramadan, right? Ramadan. The very first ayat of the Quran revealed to the Prophet ﷺ to basically give him the mission of his prophecy, alayhi salatu wasalam, are these ayat to start the surah. So the first 5 ayat were the first ones revealed to the Prophet ﷺ out of all of the entire Quran, and the next 14 ayat came a little bit later. Still, obviously early Meccan, but there was a gap between the first 5 and the next 14. If we look at in our Gregorian calendar, is the year 610, Ramadan of 610. Now, we all know the story of the revelation of the Quran. So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do want to refer to some pieces of it, inshallah ta'ala. Like I said, the first 5 ayat were revealed at a time when the Prophet ﷺ was 40 years old. Alayhi salatu wassalam, it was a time when he was living in Mecca, and as he's described, ضاق صدره. His chest was constrained. It was constrained because of what people around him were doing. There was corruption, right? The powerful, the rich got the way. Otherwise, you didn't get your way. There was oppression, dhulm. There was shirk and kufr. And the Prophet ﷺ knew that, that wasn't, that there was something wrong with associating and worshiping idols. There was distractions. There was no connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was looking for his purpose, alayhi salatu wasalam. And so what he would do, he would isolate himself. As we all know, he would go to Ghar Hira, the cave of Hira, and he would spend a few days there, alone contemplating, and in a spot where he could see the Kaaba. And if you've ever been, you overlook and it's beautiful. You see the Kaaba and Mecca. And this happened, obviously, he would do this, alayhi salatu wasalam, every now and then. And one time when he ascended to Ghar Hira, and he was there, he saw basically what we all know, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, where he spread his 600 wings, covered the entire sky, and this brought fear to the Prophet ﷺ, and the command came, Iqra. And I'm not going to translate the word Iqra because I'm going to explain it in a bit, inshallah. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he understood it, ﷺ, as read. Right? That's how he understood it. And so he would respond, he said, Ma ana biqari. And so Jibreel ﷺ would come, he would embrace him really tightly, and he would release him, he would say, Iqra. And this happened 3 times, and the Prophet would say, Ma ana biqari. And then we know the first 5 ayat that were revealed, that we'll read them shortly, inshallah ta'ala. And this is what we call asbab al-nuzul. This is the reason of the revelation. Now, Aisha radiallahu anha described the Prophet ﷺ's time before prophecy, and she said that just before prophecy, when these ayat were revealed, he would get clear signs or some signs that of prophecy, which entailed getting dreams, and they would be fulfilled exactly the way he got them, alayhi salatu wasalam. And some scholars divide prophecy into 46 parts over 23 years. Each part is a half a year, essentially. And the first half is that period of dreaming and these dreams happening. So we all know the story. He was afraid, alayhi salatu wasalam. He ran back home, and he went to Khadija radiallahu anha. He said, Zamiluni, Zamiluni, cover me, cover me. And he had the conversation with her, and he told her what happened. And she told him that, you should not fear. These are glad tidings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let you down. You join your kin, you always tell the truth, you help the weak, you are generous to your guests, and you help people or those in need during calamities. And so she took him, alayhi salatu wasalam, to her cousin, Waraqa bin Nawfal, jazakallah khair, and who was Christian. He was a devout Christian who was knowledgeable, and he told the Prophet ﷺ that, this is the same revelation, or the same type of revelation that was sent to Musa alayhi salam, and I wish I was a young man, basically to live to the point where your people will drive you out. Your people would drive you out of the city. And the Prophet ﷺ would ask Waraqa, you say, will they drive me out? And Waraqa would say, yes. Every man that came with something similar, or a message similar to what you've been given, has been expelled by his people. I wish I would live to the day that would happen, and I would fully support you. But we know that Waraqa passed away shortly after that. And I also want you to pay attention to the name as well of Waraqa bin Nawfal. Okay, so we all know the story. Um, what is the, what is the meaning of Iqra? Let's read the ayat first so that I can describe that meaning, inshallah ta'ala, in its comprehensive nature. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. الذي علم بالقلم. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So, اقرأ. If اقرأ meant read, would you think that the very first commandment that the Prophet ﷺ would receive from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is the first message between any communication from the heavens and the earth in over 600 years. Silence for 600 years between the heavens and the earth. And the very first thing that happens after about 610 years is Iqra. And that the Prophet ﷺ, with that command, he would not fulfill it. Would you believe that? Did the Prophet ﷺ not fulfill the very first command? Because we know that the Prophet ﷺ was ummi. He didn't know how to read, and he didn't know how to write. So does Iqra mean read? It doesn't. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ would have learned how to read. That's how he understood it, right? That's how he understood it. But the meaning comes clear when you cover the surah, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, once upon realizing what that means, and what the Sahaba realized what that means, they fulfilled that commandment. Initially, he thought it was read, but it doesn't mean read. Reading is a part of the comprehensive meaning of Iqra. So what does Iqra mean? Iqra is to understand, to learn, to reflect, to gather information, all with the goal of developing and growing and to fulfill your particular purpose. So it's really the phenomenon of learning, the phenomenon of reflecting, understanding, and comprehending, such that you will understand how do you fulfill your role and grow in doing so. We all know that the Prophet ﷺ, had the meaning meant read, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have started with the word utlu. Utlu. Because utlu means recite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that, utlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitabi wa aqim as-salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, recite from what was revealed to you from the Quran and establish prayer. Right? الذين يتلون كتاب الله الذين يتلون الكتاب حق تلاوته. Those who recite the book. Tilawa or utlu means to recite, to read. But Iqra means more than that. The Prophet ﷺ, again emphasizing this meaning of gaining of knowledge and understanding and comprehension. There's a couple of, there's many hadiths, but a couple I'll mention inshallah ta'ala. عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وسلم طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. So the seeking of knowledge is obligation on every Muslim. And so I want you to start looking at Iqra as a more comprehensive meaning. Somebody may say to you, Iqra hayatak. Does that mean read your life? That doesn't make sense, right? Iqra hayatak means provide me your experience of what you've learned so that I may benefit. So when you're asking somebody to provide you from their life experiences, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? So you can learn. Essentially, when you read a book, when you spend 3-4 hours reading a 50 or 100-page book about someone, what are you doing? You're taking their entire 50 years of life, or whatever, how long they've lived, And it's all summarized in a few hours so that you can learn from their life experiences. Right? And yes, you do that through reading, right? But that's one mechanism of attaining that information. Right? But Iqra in its entirety is to understand and gain knowledge. All for understanding this purpose that you're living through and your main objectives and goals in life. And Iqra, and Islam was built on this idea of Iqra. If you look at any nation that overpowered a previous nation that was in control, throughout history. Normally, what nations did before Islam is when they conquered another nation, they never cared about any of their literature, anything that they've advanced, that they've developed. They would put aside, they would ignore, and they would keep with what they brought themselves, what they know. That's what generations upon generations did until Islam came. Islam was the very first nation, very first ummah, to actually come and take what people have left behind and advance that even further. And this is because the Sahaba and the Tabi'een understood this concept of Iqra. So Islam, the Muslims were the very first people to translate literature, science, medicine, mathematics, physics, and so on into different languages because they appreciated knowledge. They didn't have this concept of ignorance to say, no, this is what belonged to the people before us, we have our way. Right? And this is what people in Mecca before Islam used to think. Right? They used to follow what their forefathers did. They would follow their forefathers to the T. Right? What's the ayah that I'm trying to remember now? وَإِنَّ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ لَمُقْتَدُونَ. When the disbelievers were asked, what are you following? We follow our forefathers, and we are on their path. We're using their path as guidance. Right? أَوْلَوْ كَانَ أَبَاهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. What if their parents or their forefathers didn't know much, or they were ignorant, and they weren't guided, but they're following their path? And by the way, this mentality exists till today. We follow what we were taught. This is the way it is, and we will see how this surah will tackle that idea. And that's not part of Iqra. The Prophet ﷺ used this concept of Iqra. And if you think about his leadership ﷺ, in terms of so before we get there, maybe we'll just talk about how Islam, when it gathered a lot of the knowledge that people had developed before it and translated into many languages and brought it all together, when Islam was basically, the Muslims were defeated in Spain, right, by the Crusaders. The Christians found all of this knowledge compiled in one place. And Michael Hart, do you guys know Michael Hart? He's a historian who said that he had a book, Most Influential People to Ever Live. Forget the title of the book. He ranked the Prophet ﷺ as number 1, most influential figure in the history of mankind. Michael Hart reported that he had said, if Islam did not come based on the practices of knowledge and appreciation of ilm, if they didn't do what they've done in translating and compiling all of the knowledge in different sciences and social sciences and literature and so on, mankind would have been behind 2,000 to 3,000 years. 2,000 to 3,000 years we would be behind, which means you wouldn't have a laptop, you wouldn't have an iPhone. You would probably be here in a heated place. Okay? And this is because of the nation of Iqra, which is the nation that the Prophet ﷺ came, and the very first commandment. If you think about any commandment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have revealed, Iqra was so. The very first one, Iqra. Not pray, not believe, Iqra. And that's what distinguishes the human from everybody else. Sayyidina Adam's story we know. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا ثُمَّ عَرَضَهُمْ عَلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the names to Sayyidina Adam, and he presented it before the angels. And فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين. If you're truthful, if you would tell me the names of these things. And said, سبحانك لا علم لنا. We have no knowledge. إلا ما علمتنا, except what you've taught us. What did Sayyidina Adam come with that's special? What elevated him? What elevates humanity above anything else? This. And how many times in the Quran do you see the ayat? أفلا يتدبرون أفلا يعقلون أفلا يتفكرون. Do they not contemplate, reflect, think? These are all rhetorical questions. We're not going to have the staff of Sayyidina Musa to split the ocean. We're not going to have birds that come and drop things on oppressors. Why? Because that time for these things is gone. We have something even more powerful, and that is the mind. This is what distinguishes humanity post Sayyidina Muhammad till the day of judgment. This. You're not going to have miracles. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do what He wishes. He can, His soldiers are many and they're unknown. But at the same time, He gave us this. This is what we are to utilize. Right? This is the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Ummah Prophet ﷺ, and it started with Iqra. So Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. So I hope, I'm going to keep using the word Iqra. I hope you know what it means now. It's in its comprehensive nature. Iqra what? Bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. It doesn't say what to Iqra. What do you Iqra? It just says, there's no maf'ul bihi, basically. There's nothing, Allah doesn't say Iqra this. It just Iqra. So what do you Iqra? Anything and everything that can give you knowledge, that's beneficial. There's no limitations as long as it's beneficial. And it serves your goal and objective of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismi Rabbik. So in the name of your Lord. So it has to be tied to your purpose. Because anything, when we say Bismillah, before we eat or we do anything, we say in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're connecting that activity you're doing to your Creator. I.e., you're doing it for the sake of your Creator. This is why we're doing it. We start with His name, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting knowledge in His name. Iqra bismi rabbika. Right? Bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. The one who created. The one who created. So why created? Why the one who created? Because your creation has to do, everything about you is tied to your creation. Your provision, your personality, what you like, what you don't like, your physical, your mental state, your spiritual state is all part of your creation. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. The Prophet ﷺ, and I said I was going to mention it and I forgot. He used this ayah. He's probably the most, before him, probably the first leader before, people after him learned from him, ﷺ, but employed this concept beautifully. If you think about any leader before the Prophet ﷺ, and even after, unfortunately, they often come with a mindset that I will dictate, I will command, I will say this, and it will happen. I may hear people out, but I have my way, and I think my way may be better. It was revolutionary that the Prophet ﷺ, he would ask his Sahaba, what do you think the best thing we should do? He would consult with them. Ashiru alayya, ayyuhan nas, right? Tell me what you think we should do. He would consult with the Sahaba all the time. And in fact, before Uhud, when they were deciding, should we stay in Mecca, or should we stay in Medina, or we should go out of Medina to basically protect the Ummah, the Sahaba voted out of Medina. The Prophet ﷺ wanted to stay in Medina. But when it was decided because of the numbers that they would go outside, the Prophet ﷺ put his shield on, and the Sahaba recognized that he didn't want that. He didn't want that, but he didn't say he didn't want it. But they felt that he didn't want it. So They said to the Prophet, oh no, we'll stay in the Medina. He said, no, it is not befitting of a prophet that when he puts his armor on, basically understands what that he's going to change his mind. And he based it on the people. What leader consults, asks women and children for their feedback? Alayhi Salatu used to do that all the time. Why? Because this is part of Iqra. Consultation, getting everybody in the room, no matter how educated or not you may be, you have something to offer. Everybody has life experiences that they can offer that can benefit somebody. There is not one single soul in the room that can't offer benefit to somebody else. And it's up to us, and this is why Islam encourages us to be a community, so that you and I can learn from each other. Because everybody has life experiences. You can try to live everything without learning from other people, and you're going to trial and error so many times, and you're going to fall on your face many times. Or you take someone's advice, even if they're younger, It's not just the older people that you seek advice from, even the younger. How many times do you see that, unfortunately, in our day and age, older people consult younger people? It doesn't happen very much. Maybe if they're experts in the field, but how many people even, ask kids, what do you think we should do? Just to learn, not just to teach, but to learn. Everybody has something to offer. Everybody's got life experiences. And not all of us fall into the same holes all the time. But everybody falls into different problems. We can all benefit from each other. But the only way to do that is through Iqra. Having that mentality that I can learn from so-and-so. I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm better, I have more experience, I'm older, I'm wiser, I'm more educated than somebody else. And you'll see in the surah it talks about that. Okay? So it's important that we understand that Iqra is again, we can talk about this, I've probably spent already too much time. But if you think about the ayat that we're reading, and we'll go through them inshallah ta'ala, how many times the reference to knowledge? Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. That's one. Right? خلق الإنسان من علق. Right? Iqra again. وربك. So it's two Iqras. وربك الأكرم. الذي علم. علم is a reference to learning. بالقلم. Qalam is also a tool of learning. Again, علم in the last ayah, in the fifth ayah, that's the fifth reference. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. A sixth. 6 times there's a reference to knowledge in the first 5 ayat that were revealed to the Prophet. That's how important this topic is. That's how important this topic. So we'll continue. خلق الإنسان من علق. The one who created the insan from alaq, from a blood clot. A reference to the blood clot. When you and I are in the form of a blood clot before we were born, this was absolutely the weakest the human will be in their entire existence. When you're hanging as a blood clot, most miscarriages happen during this phase. It's so loosely attached. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding you that you and I came from that very weak point to where we are now. So we had absolutely the weakest point of no knowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to a point where we understand, where we reflect, and we can live and function independently. And this is a reminder of your humble beginnings. الذي خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم. Again, اقرأ, and you'll find your Lord to be not Kareem, Al-Akram. It's the epitome of generosity. So if you just seek to learn and understand, you will find your Lord, you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will be extremely generous with you. He will be extremely generous with you. And وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى وَبِلَا تَشْبِيهٍ. This is not to associate examples with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they kind of just give you an example that may be relatable. Whether you're a father or you're the son or daughter and mom, how many times Did you hear the expression in your life? Maybe you didn't, but just study. I'll take care of everything else. Just study. Focus on your studies. Everything will be covered for you. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially telling us, Iqra, and you will find me to be there for you in everything you want. Not Kareem, Al-Akram. You can't get higher than Al-Akram with most generosity. But it's upon us to Iqra. وَرَبُّكَ الْأَكْرَمُ الَّذِي عَلَّمَ بِالْقَلَمِ, the one who taught with the pen. What does the pen mean here? The pen is a tool of knowledge. What does it do? What does a pen do? It preserves the knowledge. It documents the knowledge. And why is that important? Because knowledge is meant to be passed down. Knowledge is meant to be passed down. And if we're just learning for the sake of learning, not with the sake of understanding, of thriving, of developing and advancing so that we can teach the next generation, then that's a problem. That's a problem. You know, generation upon generation, there are generations that come after, you know, the ones before that may be, you know, less ambitious, maybe less generous, maybe more cowardly, maybe less honest. Okay? But to have a generation come after another generation and it's more ignorant, that's a problem. How can you be more ignorant? Generation's supposed to build knowledge upon the previous generations. But to have a generation actually sink, that's a problem. That's not acceptable. And the pen is meant to be that symbolic. It's physical too. It's not just symbolic, but the importance of preservation of knowledge. Imagine if the Sahaba radiallahu anhum did not take care of compiling the Quran written form. The Prophet ordered them to write as he was reciting the ayat on them. But imagine they neglected. They said, oh, we know the Quran, we've memorized it, push it aside. We wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for us to have it and for it to be preserved that way. But the importance of the pen. So if the concept of Iqra still, you know, is not clear to you, think about, so, you know, the 6 references already in 5 ayat, including the pen, and, you know, the first person that told the Prophet ﷺ about what his mission really entails is Waraqa bin Nawfal. What does Waraqa mean? Paper. The article on which knowledge is stored. Oh, and by the way, do you know the next surah that was revealed? Right after these 5 ayat? Qalam. Qalam, the pen. Right? If that's not obvious enough, that this is all about learning and understanding and comprehending, then we have misunderstood the Quran. And remember I said the next 14 ayat, there's a general understanding for all of us, but there's also a specific reason why they were revealed. And I mentioned it, did I maybe not mentioned it, is regarding an individual. Does anyone know? Abu Jahl. We'll talk about that shortly. Abu Jahl means what? The father of ignorance, the lack of knowledge. And actually the next set of ayat, the rest of the surah, talk about what it means not to be of the people of Iqra. What are the things that you should be avoiding? What are the pitfalls that you would need to avoid in order for you to fall outside of being of the nation of Iqra? So we'll get to that inshallah ta'ala. Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram alladhi 'allama bil qalam 'allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam. He subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the insan what they did not know. What they did not know. Any questions so far about what we've talked about before we move on? Okay. There are a few you know, kind of examples that I'd like to actually, in more, you know, kind of like modern day of this concept of knowledge and building upon it. And unfortunately, I feel like in our generation, these recent generations, we're unaware of the accomplishments of the Muslims before us. but even how people observed knowledge. So Imam Muslim, rahimahullah, compiled his Sahih collection, right? He called it Al-Jami' al-Sahih. The next scholar that came after him called it Al-Mu'lim fi Sahih Muslim. So he took the hadith compiled by Muslim, rahimahullah, and he added commentary. Okay. The next scholar that came after him, Ikmalu Mu'lim, the completion of that book before. So they keep adding to that knowledge because it's meant for us, meant for humanity to advance upon which you took. And so when you have scholars that pass away, that's a huge loss for the ummah. It's a huge loss for the ummah. They're giants, and if we don't have people that that take that knowledge and advance it further, then we're going to be in a problem as a society. One another kind of cool thing is, who likes algebra? Not many people. When you're asked to solve for x, right? You guys remember solving for x? You know that x actually came from Khwarizmi, who is the father of algebra, who actually used to use the term shay'. Shay' means something, but he used to abbreviate it with sheen. Okay, and sheen, obviously, in Arabic, before even putting the diacritical points, which are the dots, sheen and seen used to look the same. Okay, so they simplified it to seen, and the Greek alphabet, they looked at the sheen, and their chai, their letter chai or kai, is actually an X. So, and then the Latins took it from it, and they kept using X. That X comes from Al-Khwarizmi. So there's a lot of things that I think, as a society, we don't take time to learn in order for us to appreciate, educate, and advance further. Nonetheless, I hope that was kind of a nice tidbit for you. Let's move, inshallah ta'ala, to the next part of the surah. Now, inshallah, we'll be finished by around 9:20. We started a bit late, so another 20-25 minutes, inshallah ta'ala. I do want to talk about the second half, which covers the things that you need to avoid in order for you to be part of the ummah of Iqra. Now, Islam is like an app, okay? You can't download an app onto a phone without a operating system, okay? So if you don't have an operating system, you can't download apps. You cannot download Islam if you don't have the operating system of Iqra. If you don't take Iqra as a way of life, you can be Muslim, but you will not benefit from Islam. You need to have that system in place, that understanding, that paradigm of my goal is to learn and develop and grow so I can contribute and fulfill the role of my existence. That needs to be fully understood. Otherwise, Islam will not be a benefit to any of us. And so we said that the second half of the surah talks about pitfalls or things that you need to avoid in order to be able to download Islam to benefit from. Otherwise, you will not benefit from Islam, and you will not be of the ummah of Iqra. Now, I'll give you the specific example that these ayat were revealed for, but also the general. The specific is that these ayat are concerning Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl obviously was an enemy of the Prophet ﷺ, and he tried to, he's his uncle, but he tried to prevent him from spreading the message. And he had threatened the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, by Allat and Al-Uzza, that if I find him find the Prophet ﷺ prostrating in front of the Kaaba, that I will put my foot on his neck and rub his face into the dust. And then when he saw the Prophet ﷺ one day praying and prostrating, he came close to fulfill that. But then he stopped, his face looked like a ghost, he was frightened, and then he walked, turned back and ran away. And so when he was asked, why did you do that? He said, I saw a pit of fire and a terrible creature between me and Muhammad, and that creature had some wings. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard about this, the Prophet ﷺ said, had he come near me, the angels would have struck him and tore him into pieces. In another narration, the angels would have seized him here and there, then and there. And so this was an attempt that Abu Jahl came to do, and these ayat were revealed concerning Abu Jahl for the specific. Of course, we all know that these are not just for Abu Jahl, they're for us. And so we're going to cover from our perspective what these ayat mean. In our context, if you want to be the ummah of Iqra, avoid these things. Now, out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is when He asks you to stay away from things. That is a blessing. Why is that a blessing? Because had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you have to do A, B, C, and D, then these are the only things you can do. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala negates you from doing A, B, C, and D, then everything else is open. You see the difference? So when Allah asks you to do something versus asks you to refrain from something, if He asks you to refrain, it's actually easier for you and I, because it establishes, just don't approach these things, everything else is halal. Versus, you have to do these things, then there's nothing but these things. So it's out of His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala that in the rest of the surah, He tells you not to do certain things. Okay? So that it makes it easier for us to fulfill, inshallah ta'ala, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to fulfill. It's tayseer, it's ease that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing us. Now, what are these things that we need to avoid? Let's continue reading them, inshallah ta'ala. كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى إن إلى ربك الرجعى أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى أرأيت إن كذب وتولى ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى. All right, so what are the matters you need to avoid in order for you to be in the ummah of Iqra? The ayah starts kalla, so negation, right? So the insan, it's to tell you that you don't want to be what's to come. Innal insana la yatagha. Indeed, the human is la yatagha. So la is an emphasis of yatagha. What does yatagha mean if you're part one? Anybody in part one that wants to describe what yatagha means? I'll pick on some of the part one folks. Right, transgress beyond a limit. And that transgression has two main characteristics: arrogance and oppression. So when you're somebody, wal'iyadu billah, that is yatgha, transgresses, there are two characteristics about that person. They are oppressors of other people, and they are arrogant. These are characteristics of those who transgress, because they know these are limits, yet they knowingly transgress them, because they see themselves as superior, and that is arrogance. You know there's a red line, you cross it anyway. You know a red line, you cross it anyway, and you know it's going to harm other people, right? That's oppression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطَغَى. The insan is transgressing through arrogance and oppression, in brackets, right? أَرْرَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. The first thing you want to avoid, أَرْرَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. That person, أَرْرَآهُ, sees themselves as istaghna, self-sufficient. So the first thing you want to avoid in order for you to be the people of Iqra is to avoid feeling or believing you're self-sufficient. You are good enough. You don't need other people. You don't need to go talk to so-and-so. You don't need to sit and listen. You don't need to ask somebody about their experience. Right? I can do this on my own. I'm good enough. I'm educated. I can learn it. I can figure it out. That mentality, if you have that mentality, that's a no-no if you want to be part of Iqra. Because Iqra is to encourage you to share experiences, to learn from other people, right? To do it also through reading, yes. Right? Gaining understanding and comprehension. And if you and I feel that we are self-sufficient, then that is a barrier to that. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. If one feels أَرَّآهُ اسْتَغْنَى, if one feels self-sufficient, nobody is self-sufficient. Everybody is dependent on someone. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why everyone's dependent on Allah, and Allah depends on no one. That's why istighna comes from, right, the fact that you are independent, and only name that belongs of not needing anyone is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name, Al-Ghani, the one who is not in need of anyone. He is sufficient, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He doesn't need anything and anyone. What we do is not for him. What we do is for us. It doesn't increase him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in anything in his kingdom. Whether we obey him or whether we transgress him, it doesn't affect him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only one that's independent. Everybody else needs someone. And if you don't need someone now, you will need someone in the future. Guaranteed. You look at, if we've seen older people, if your parents are getting old, if uncles and aunts, people are dependent. When you're even sick, you don't have to be old. You're dependent. You were created to be dependent. Right? So it's somebody who sees themselves as self-sufficient. And by the way, somebody who sees themselves as self-sufficient is actually ignorant. Ignorant. If you and I think that, oh, we don't need other people, that's ignorance. Right? It means you don't understand. You really don't. Okay? And everybody has something to offer. And then Allah reminds us, Inna ila rabbika ruj'a. To him is your return. Right? He's the one that you're dependent on, and he makes you dependent on the rest of his creation. Right? Somebody, one of the righteous people made dua, and or heard somebody making dua saying, "Oh Allah, make me be independent of everyone." And he said, this person's asking Allah for death. He's asking for death. At what point you're going to be independent of anyone, except when you die? Right? So we all depend. So don't act in that mentality that I'm independent, I'm good enough, I don't need people. Inna ila rabbika ruj'a. Ara'ayta alladhi yanha. This is the second point. Ara'ayta, and Allah starts the next three ayat with ara'ayta. Do you see? Do you see? Look, observe. Alladhi yanha abadan idha salla. Do you see somebody who stops or forbids or doesn't allow somebody from abadan, a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, idha salla, if they wanted to establish the prayer. Now that's the literal translation. And that applies to Abu Jahl, right? Because he tried to stop the Prophet ﷺ from praying. But what is the comprehensive meaning for us? Does it physically just mean I go stop somebody from praying? What was prayer to Quraysh, to Abu Jahl? Prayer was something new. Prayer was something that they did not know, that was new to them. Right? So when they saw the Prophet ﷺ doing something new, they didn't like it. Right? Inna wajadana aba'ana ala umma wa inna ala atharihim muqtadun. We found our fathers doing this, acting and behaving this way, and we are following their path. They saw something new, they didn't like it. They attacked it, they tried to stop it. And so if you want to be part of people of Iqra, what you should avoid is avoid combating or rejecting something just because it's new. Right? Islam actually came with the new. Islam has a structure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed Islam to be this way. It's flexible, such that when the times change, the fiqh can support these changing times and changing places. This is why, we talk about, there's difference of opinion. Difference of opinion is a ni'mah. It's a blessing, because it allows for things to conform when times change. It's not rigid. It's not this way or the highway. It allows you to live life to accomplish your goals and objectives by supporting you based on your time. I'm not talking about the fundamentals here, right? I'm not talking about changing of the La ilaha illallah, our belief system. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the jurisprudence, the way, the laws of which apply, when they apply and when they don't, right? Umar radiallahu anhu, when there was famine and people were stealing, he didn't cut their hands off. But that's the had of stealing, isn't it? Right? Islam came to conform. It came with the new. So when people rejected the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't like him praying. He came with something that Quraysh never saw. They didn't like it. They tried to stop it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, if you are people of Iqra, then do not reject the new just because it's new. If it's wrong, you reject it. But that's on the principle that it's wrong. But you don't reject something just because it's new. And this is the important concept of Islam, of Iqra. Okay? أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى أرأيت إن كان على الهدى. Again, أرأيت. You see that if that person إن كان على الهدى, that perhaps إن كان, not إذا كان, إن كان, and that is to highlight that perhaps, just perhaps, that person is guided. Right? It's talking to Abu Jahl, but it's also talking to us. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to Abu Jahl and the disbelievers, perhaps Muhammad alayhi salatu, perhaps he is guided, so maybe listen to him. Right? What about us? If we are people of Iqra, right? Perhaps when we go into a position of discussion, of argument, what do? What's our goal? Normally, unfortunately, we turn this off. We are there just to make a point and make people accept our points. That's why we argue. That's why people argue. They discuss because and a lot of people do this. They don't listen to understand. They listen so that they can see what they're going to respond back because they want their point to be on top. They want their point to be the right one. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that perhaps if you're coming into a discussion, yes, you should go in with an understanding that you are right, but there's a possibility you're wrong. Perhaps the person you're talking to, perhaps in kana ala al-huda, there may be a small chance that they're right and you're wrong. Yes, go in with the understanding that you're right, but hear people out. Don't hear them so you can rebuttal. Hear them to see what they're saying. Maybe, perhaps, they're on the truth. They're guided. Maybe you can learn something from them. And we have to examine how we approach arguments and discussions and debates and dialogue. Do we go in just to make our points and make people accept it? Or do we go in, yes, we have a conviction that we're right, but there's a slight chance that we're wrong. And when we listen, we always examine our understanding so that we see, maybe actually I understood this or overlooked this. Maybe they're right. Maybe I have a different perspective. Maybe I can learn from it. Iqra. Otherwise, if you go in with your points, hard-headed, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be part of Iqra. So that's the third thing to avoid. أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى, or that he not only calls to guidance, or he perhaps calls for taqwa. For taqwa comes from the concept of avoiding things so that displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the last one. أرأيت إن كذب وتولى. Do you see that person? Again, the specific is Abu Jahl, but it also applies to all of us. إن كذب وتولى. That they كذب means, we talked about this in part 1. What does كذب mean? It means so you know the truth, deep down inside you know, but you don't accept it, or you give excuse upon excuse not to accept it because it doesn't jive with what you want. It doesn't align with your desire or what you feel like doing or how you feel like behaving or your decision making. So takdhib, when you know something is right, but you disregard it or push it away, that's called takdhib, because it doesn't, I have personal desires, I have personal interests, and it doesn't fulfill those interests. Having that does not allow you to be part of Iqra. Will not help you learn, because you're coming in with already trying to fulfill a particular interest that you have, a desire that you have, and you're not going to accept what people tell you, because it doesn't meet what I need or what I want, what I feel like. Right? And Abu Jahl, actually, Abu Jahl, he knew that what the Prophet ﷺ was saying was the truth. Right? He knew it. He was asked about it. And he said, I know he's coming for, what he's saying is true. But he said, I can't accept what he's saying. And so when he was asked, why, he said, and does anybody know what tribe Abu Jahl is from? Yes, Banu Makhzum, right? Makhzum. And the Prophet's name is Banu Hashim. And those two tribes were neck and neck. When they would field pilgrims, they also had to do something else to be on top. If they had a poet, we had to have 3 poets, Abu Jahl is saying. We always were neck and neck, like 2 race horses, Banu Makhzum and Banu Hashim. And when they came with the Prophet, we couldn't come with something better. So we had to reject the Prophet, even though they knew that the Prophet is saying is true. And this is against the concept of Iqra. You know something, you don't accept it just because it does not meet your desires or your interests. Or it shows your weakness. Or it doesn't elevate you in society. Right? I won't accept this. Like, we see this all the time in academia and in research. Researchers will reject somebody else's thesis or data or findings just because they're neck and neck on the academic scale, and globally they're recognized and they want to be higher. No, we reject this paper. On what basis? Is it because there's something wrong? Which is fine. But if it's not, because there's another reason, then that's not part of Iqra. So I hope those are the things that we want to avoid. 4 things we said, right? Can we repeat them, inshallah ta'ala? Anyone who wants to volunteer with one of them? How do you avoid being people of avoiding not being a people of Iqra? Thinking you're self-sufficient? So transgression that causes you to feel, to see yourself as self-sufficient, yes? What other ones? Rejecting change just because it's new? Not because it's wrong, but because it's new? Same one? 2 more. Yes, have an open mind, right? When you're coming into even arguments, and like, I'm right. Okay? Yeah, you're right. But is there a chance you're wrong? Maybe there's a chance. Hear them out. Listen to understand. Listen to comprehend. Don't listen so that you can rebuttal. That's our problem. We want to be on, and that's, by the way, la yatgha. That's part of arrogance. That we feel like we're right and they're wrong. Okay, maybe, but is there a chance you're wrong? Okay. What's the last one? Right. You know it's right, turn away from it. Why? Yeah, because it doesn't meet what you want out of it. It doesn't get you the bonus or the edge. Okay? Jazakumullah khair. So these 4 behaviors are not going to help you enter the Iqra mentality. So let's continue the surah, inshallah. We'll wrap up. And we alam ya'lam bi anna Allah yara. Does this person not know? Again, ya'lam, another reference to knowledge. Alam ya'lam bi anna Allah yara, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees everything. So let's continue reading. كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية ناصية كاذبة خاطئة فليدع ناديه سندع الزبانية كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب. So the sujood tilawa, inshallah, we can all make sujood. So there's a dua also when you go to Sajid Tilawa, if you want to, there's multiple dua if you want to, memorize them. You can look them up, but one of them is سجد وجهي للذي خلقه وسمعه وبصره بقوته وحوله فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. So inshallah ta'ala, if you look them up, just for the sake of time, I won't go into explaining that, but they're available inshallah ta'ala. Okay. كلا لئن لم ينتهي لنسفع بناصية. So كلا means nay, negating that these what you just heard is things you want to avoid. لئن لم ينتهي, if they do not stop, لنسفعا بالناصية. لنسفعا supposed to be with a noon, لنسفعا, right? But we say لنسفعا بالناصية because of the tajweed rulings. Comes from safa'a. لنسفعا comes from safa'a, and that is to drag something. To drag something in a way that's humiliating or mistreating. Okay. لنسفعا بالناصية. Nasiya is your forelock. Okay. The part of your brain which is the front of your basically frontal lobe. If I have my physiology right. This is the part that is basically most honored of the human, right? The top of your head. This is what you bow or prostrate down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you say, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. You put it down to the lowest part you can on the ground, and you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you say, perfection belongs to the one who's most high. So you lower yourself by putting this on the ground and declare you are the most high to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that person who doesn't stop those things that we just talked about, they will be dragged by their forelocks, وَلَيَادُ بِاللَّهِ. Nasiya, so Allah describes this nasiya, this forelock, as kadhiba and khati'a. Kadhiba, we talked about takdhib, right? It denied the truth when it saw it. Knowledge that came by, it rejected it. Kadhibatin khati'a, and it was a sinful forelock. It engaged in sin. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلْيَدْعُ نَادِيَةً. Let them call their nadiya. Their nadiya is their group. And if you've ever been to maybe you're part of a nadi or a club. Nadi is a club where groups of people come together, right? فَلْيَدْعُ نَادِيَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, let them call their group. The group who has the same mentality of I'm self-sufficient. I don't need to learn. This is new. I don't accept that it's new, right? I will not listen to that person because I know I'm right 100%. I'm not going to accept this piece of information or knowledge or guidance because I have an excuse or this just doesn't meet what I want. And these are things that these battles that you have inside of you, maybe not necessarily explicitly saying them, but Allah saying, bring your group. سَنَدْعُ الزَّبَانِيَةَ. We're going to bring the zabaniya, the angels of hell. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatens the person. Bring your people. I'll bring my creation. كَلَّا لَا تُطِعْهُ وَاسْجُدْ وَاقْتَرِبْ. So nay, do not follow him. So specifically again Abu Jahl, but in general, do not follow that person that is not the people of Iqra. لَا تُطِعْهُ. لَا تُطِعْهُ. Do not follow them. Ta'a doesn't necessarily mean obedience. It also means following. لَا تُطِعْهُ. Do not follow people like that. And then two things. وَاسْجُدْ وَاقْتَرِبْ. Wasjud is an act of worship that is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Waqtarib. So sujood is your relationship, your ibadah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's waqtarib? Some people say, and some scholars say, it's prostrate so that you can get nearer to Allah. But actually also, waqtarib is come closer. How do you come closer? What's the last word of the surah? Iqtarib. What's the first one? Iqra. You want to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You iqra. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The people who have the most fear and are in most awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are people of knowledge, al-ulama. Iqra will bring you closer to Allah. Knowledge, as we mentioned in some of the ahadith already, are what brings you to Allah, closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is Surah Al-Alaq. I hope that it provides a different perspective than what we're used to. It's one of those surahs that is poorly understood, particularly the word Iqra, but even more so. Most people have the first 5 ayat memorized, but the rest of the surah, maybe not so much or so well. They're very important because they highlight what it means not to be of the people of Iqra. Islam, again, haqq. When you see haqq, you accept haqq without conditions. If you're going to only accept haqq based on conditions, then Islam's not going to work for you. Right? Because of the 4 things that Allah says avoid. If you have any of those, Islam will not download properly. It will not benefit you. You need to get rid of those and be people of Allah. So when Islam is downloaded, it benefits you. I mean, we can call ourselves Muslims, but how much do we live Islam? Based on our understanding of this concept. I hope that was beneficial. Jazakumullah khair. Any questions before we close? Yes.
Male, is it oppressed to other people and themselves?
Yes. Yes. Oppression is to yourself as well. Absolutely. Any other questions? So by the way, read, right? Read. Because that's one method of acquiring knowledge and learning is reading. Right? But that the fact that Prophet didn't learn how to read tells you that it doesn't mean read. Right? But that's one wasila. That's one way to do it. And please, and I mentioned this before, maybe in one of the khawatir, if we had the past, COVID's, it's been 4 years now, right, since it started. If we'd spent every day since COVID started, right, half an hour before sleeping, just half an hour, right? I'm sure we're probably doing this many times before we sleep. Maybe not right up before sleep, we shouldn't, but maybe it's half an hour, or maybe it's less, maybe it's more. But if we spent half an hour reading history, reading, the sciences, social sciences, parenting, communities, how, productivity, skills. If we spent half an hour for the past 4 years every day, which is very small, we would have spent about 1,000 hours reading. An average person, let's take really, high level stats, finishes a book, let's say in 10 hours. That's 100 books that you would have read. And let's say if you read 5 books per area, per theme, per subject matter, you would have been well versed in about 20 areas. 20 by half an hour. Imagine if everybody in our ummah did that, how much advanced we would be. We wouldn't be relying on everybody else to take it to the next level. Unfortunately, I mean, we've got, alhamdulillah, there's individuals who are doing a lot, but as an ummah, we have not lived to the standard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for us of Iqra. Imagine if we just read, right? How much further we would be in our lives, in our societies, and as an ummah. It's unfortunate, really. It doesn't take very much. And we spend a lot of time, and I'll be guilty, and particularly with what's happening over in Gaza and in Palestine, you spend a lot of time looking at at news. You feel helpless, and it actually drives you to be unproductive as well. It's not to say be neglectful, like Sheikh Adnan was saying. No, don't do that. But at the same time, the people of Palestine would rather you do something about their condition than just feel bad for them. And that's attained through Iqra. It really is. Because when we give these talks about Palestine, we ask, people say, oh, what do? We donate, we make dua, and we call our politicians. What else can we do? I don't know. If we're so narrow-minded, maybe it's because we're not learning, we're not developing, we're not going outside the box. And we all have our fair share of blame. So inshallah ta'ala, we can live this surah. It's an extremely important surah, and if you can take this to your families and teach them the meanings of the surah, you would have done a great service to them, inshallah ta'ala, because having that paradigm, seeing things, when you're communicating with people, when you're interacting, that is all experience that you're gaining. that is all knowledge that will be beneficial. As they say, it's it's better to it's more productive to learn from the experience of people than you having to trial and error and experience for yourself. Any last questions before we close? Okay, so inshallah ta'ala next week we'll again same time same place. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. If you didn't collect your exam from before and you'd like to collect it, I have it.